A small, family-owned park in Erie, Pennsylvania is home to not one, but two classic Bill Tracy dark rides. The Wacky Shack opened in 1970, and the Pirates Cove opened in 1972. Located next to Lake Erie in Pennsylvania, Waldameer Park opened in 1896 and is the 10th oldest park in the nation. The two dark rides at Waldameer are unique because they have remained virtually unchanged during their 5 decades of existence. Randy Skalos, a ride operator at the park, has a long history with these attractions since riding the Wacky Shack at age 9.
I rode this dark ride the first weekend it opened in 1970. We got the Erie Sunday paper every week growing up, and there was a little photo feature magazine one Sunday. There was a picture of the giant rat inside, and it showed a little Girl Scout holding a chunk of cheese to the rat. So my parents took me here the weekend that it opened, and then that was my first time riding the ride, and I've loved it ever since.
Randy started working at Waldameer as a ride operator in 2007. In 2010, he was asked by Perry Duncan, the park's head of maintenance at that time, to help repair one of the vandalized Wacky Shack stunts. This led to him becoming the unofficial caretaker of both dark rides at the park.
This is the wine cellar room, and this is the only scene that was not screened off. And it is now, and what happened was it was an open scene, and some kids, I'm sure it was, got out of their car, took the body out, laid it across the tracks, and then all day long the cars kept smashing it. So luckily they put it back in the bin, and it sat there in pieces for a year or two, and then one day I said, you know what, I bet you I could probably put that back together because all the pieces are there. And so I put it all back together, then repainted it. And originally we had water flowing down through the mug on the body. And then we put fluorescein sodium in the water to make it glow under black light. But you know, water is not such a good thing for these. We don't use the water pump in there anymore. We just have it lit up. So after I started doing work in here, I then needed to turn my attention over to Pirates Cove because it was kind of a disaster over there. Things were broken, they were very dirty. So I took all my UV paints over there, spruced things up quite a bit. The 3 skulls in the Pirates Cove that say, I ain't got no body, that's like a perfect example of the optical white. That scene looks so incredible now. I just love it. I can't say enough about it.
I ain't got nobody.
The buildings that housed the two Waldameer dark rides were built by Armstrong Steel Buildings. Housing the attractions in steel buildings has its advantages.
Being steel, there was low chances of fire, and because that was like the biggest downfall to all the Tracy rides, where they were put in old dance hall buildings with old wood, grease, all kinds of things that weren't conducive for safety. Whereas here, there is a fire suppression and fire alarms in both buildings, but the chances of these buildings catching on fire is a lot less.
After Waldameer had the steel building for the Wacky Shack erected, Amusement Displays, a defunct New Jersey-based company run by the late Bill Tracy, took over the fitting out of the ride. The installation had a few setbacks.
So they put the front of the building in, and the barrel was delivered. Well, the barrel was too big to fit through the doors, so they had to cut the barrel in half to fit it through, and then they had to reassemble it back inside. And then over in the pool area, there's the swamp ghost hanging up high, and all those rocks around him. That was one giant panel, and that was another instance where they had to cut it in half, bring it in 2 pieces, and then reassemble.
Because of the popularity of the Wacky Shack, Waldameer went back to Bill Tracy to design and build a walkthrough attraction for the park. The result was the Pirates Cove, which opened in May of 1972. The facade to the Pirates Cove originally included a pirate in a crow's nest, which was unfortunately lost to a winter storm in the mid-70s. The large Captain Hook-style pirate on the top of the Pirate's Cove also experienced some issues over the years.
Originally, his arm moved up and down. The arm with the sword moved up and down, and that only worked for maybe 2 years. And it was kind of interesting because everyone always said Tracy's mechanic skills were not that great. And in this case, with the arm, there was a 5-gallon bucket filled with something to act as a counterweight to bring the arm back down so it could move like it was supposed to. And then around the early 2000s, the leg part started to rot and open up, and the animals would go and nest up inside there. So they had to take the pirate body down, and they almost threw it out. And one of the maintenance guys suggested, well, what if we just fill it with foam, seal it, and then repaint it? And that's what they did. They saved a brilliant landmark for Pirates Cove.
There are only a handful of Bill Tracy built attractions operating in the United States, and the Waldameer Wacky Shack is the last known operating Wacky Shack.
I've had a lot of people from New Jersey come over, from Wildwood. They've come over because they want to see some Bill Tracy stuff. So we get them from all over the country.
15 men on a dead man's chest.
Although a lot of maintenance is done to keep the original stunts operating, some changes have happened over the years.
This door was an actual cottage on the park. Mr. Nelson's mother lived in the cottage. When they tore the cottage down, they kept the door and they put the door in here, and there's the speaker for the door knocker stunt. And then the ghost up here, this is the apparition, and that came from a company called Fear Tech. That was brought in 1982, I believe. This barrel originally had 3 Tracy bodies on it. They threw 2 of them out, and the one on this side is the only remaining one. I put that skeleton, that piece of vacuum foam down there, and this half body that's on the bottom here, that came from Le Cachot at Kennywood. When they tore that down, I was down at Kennywood, and I got that from the Le Cachot building. And then this is the figure that was also from Fear Tech. This piece right here, this was brought in the early 80s, either 81 or 82. Before this piece was in here, there was a very classic Tracy stunt, and it was 6 barrels, and they were leaning over. And as you approach, the barrels would swing back and forth like they were tipping. And then right when you got up to this point, the barrels would fall right in front of you, and there was a board that went straight across. The car hit the board, pushed the barrels back, and you were safe. And this was another thing added in the early 80s. This is a Elusive Concepts ghost. And originally, before this ghost was here, since it was the late 60s, early 70s, when this ride came into play, they had a big wall that had the frosted plexiglass, and behind it there were changing lights. So it was real psychedelic, you'd see this wall with this light pattern. This is all the original paint. When Bill brought all these panels here, he had these all painted. These are all the original paint. When they first tested this ride, they came down through this hill, and they almost went out through the back end of the building, and that's when they realized they needed to put a friction brake on the car, and this brake stop for the pad to hit on. So now originally when these were first installed, the way they worked was they would open to the right, to the left, and the whole door would move left and right. And that was just being really a lot of wear and tear on the hinges. So then the maintenance guys decided just to split them in 2, and that would be that less stress. And then this skeleton up here was originally an outhouse scene of Tracy's. And when they put these big speakers in, about 10 years later, they took the outhouse down, and the outhouse is sitting behind him. This was put in in the late, when was it? Late 90s, I think this was put in. There's 2 things I'd love to get back in the ride. The first thing was Tracy put a water curtain in at the end of the ride, and that ran halfway through the 70s, and then it stopped working. So I would really like to get that back in. And then on the facade out front, there's a little dog up on the top right-hand corner. And originally, Bill made the dog animated, so he was like bobbing in and out of his little house up there. So along with the wacky eyes, you had that little bit of animation. And you know, Bill Tracy was a real firm believer in making his facade so grand that, you know, he wanted people to give up their ride tickets to come ride this, you know, really work of art. You know, these rides now, they're more like museums than they are anything else, because you won't see anything like this anywhere else. And when people go in there, I tell them, I say, look, everything inside there is the same way it was when it opened in 1970, with the exception of 2 or 3 things.
We commend Randy Scalos and the park maintenance team for keeping these classic attractions so well maintained. We would also like to thank Paul Nelson, the park's owner, for his commitment to keeping these attractions true to their original design when so many other parks have removed their dark rides. If you are ever near Western Pennsylvania, take the time to stop by this family-run park and check out these 2 classic dark attractions. You won't be disappointed. For Dark in the Park, this is Bill Cherkasky.